Hi, everyone. I'm Adriaan, a long-term attendee, first-time speaker here at CocoaHeads. And I want to talk to you about review prompting today and how you can get your app closer to a five-star rating on the App Store. Because in my experience, five-star ratings don't generally happen just by themselves. Maybe you're that lucky, but I think most people aren't. And my sort of theory behind that is that unhappy users are just much more motivated to leave you a rating on the App Store than happy ones. They obviously don't want to use your app, so they need to vent somewhere. Happy users, they're just happy using your app. Like, why would they do anything else? That's a bit of a problem if you want good ratings. So the solution to that, obviously, is ask your happy users to rate your app, and maybe help some unhappy ones on the way as well, which we'll cover as well. Since iOS 10.3, we've got SKStore ReviewController for that. That's kind of Apple's response to a litany of the library apps that were letting you developers ask for ratings before, which sort of led to some developers sort of pestering users for ratings, and it's not a good user experience. So Apple kind of stepped in and provided a native UI for that, which is the little UI pop-up you see at the bottom of the screen there. SKStore ReviewController only has it's a class with only one method, request review, so it's not much to it. The great thing about it for both users and developers is that it lets users rate the app from within the app, so you don't actually have to go out of the app to the App Store to leave a rating anymore. It comes with a few restrictions, though. So it will only be shown 3 times in a period of 365 days for any user. So you can call request review all you want, but after it's been shown for 3 times, nothing will happen. Users can also disable the rating pop-up altogether for all their apps in the Settings app. So you never really know whether, when you call request review, something's going to be shown. And another thing to sort of note is that as a developer, you don't get any feedback from the request review call. So you don't know whether the UI was shown. You'd also, if it was shown, you don't know what the user actually did, whether they left a review or not. So it's a bit of a black box, and I think Apple did that quite by design. So SKStore ReviewController sort of deals with the how to ask for a rating in your app, but it doesn't really deal with when to ask for it and who to ask. As I mentioned before, the who to ask is kind of your happy users. And they're kind of different for every app, like how do you define a happy user? But it sort of comes down to sort of 3 broad rules. So a happy user has used your app kind of long enough to form an opinion of your app and like it or love it. I had to throw a love heart in there because, you know, it's that day. Then your user sort of needs to have had some positive experiences in your app. So that's obviously different for every app, but it might be some kind of achievement. In a game, it might be, you got through a next level, or you got something done. And also, you may not want to ask any users that had recent negative experiences. And the obvious, like the most well-known negative experience is, of course, the crash. Not that we build apps that crash, of course. Then the other point is the right time. What's the right time in your app flow to actually prompt a user for a rating? Is this when a user feels particularly positive about the world, the app, themselves, while using the app? So they might have achieved something just a second ago, or they might have finished something. And also when it doesn't interrupt the user too much. So you don't want to ask a user to rate your app when they're in the middle of something. You kind of want to do it at sort of the quieter moments in the flow of your app. If you sort of look at that in sort of a loose flow diagram-y kind of way, on the left we see just a user using your app. And as sort of a byproduct of using your app, some events may change the model you have of your user. And so that might be things like how many sessions has your user used your app for, so it's kind of related to like has the user used your app long enough to actually form an opinion of your app. It may be like a really positive experiences in your app, or a proxy of that. Or negative experiences, so like you might want to log that your user just had a crash. So somewhere in your app flow, a user will hit a point in your app that triggers the actual rating scenario, sort of the rating flow. So when that happens, you look at that user model and compare that to what a happy user looks like for you. So you look like, has this user had enough positive experiences? Has he been using the app long enough? Has the app not crashed lately? And if that hasn't happened, you may do one of two things. So there's an optional step here in this flow diagram, which is showing a triage pop-up. So that's a simple alert that says, are you enjoying this app? A user can answer yes or no. If no, then clearly your model of the user in this case wasn't, for a happy user, wasn't quite right. And you accidentally selected someone who wasn't happy. So instead of sending that user on to actually rate the app, the user and yourself are much better off if you help that user solve the problem they have. So instead of showing a rating pop-up, you might send them to your customer support screen or whatever it may be. If the user indicates that they are happy, you show your rating prompt, or you say SKStore ReviewController request review, and then hopefully it will be shown. So the triage, or not to triage, the triage step is kind of an optional, as I said. It's sort of there if you choose to use it to filter out false positives in identifying users to leave a rating. And at the same time, it's also a way to help those unhappy users, as I mentioned. So how do we measure success? How do we know that what we've implemented is actually delivering results? So a couple of obvious ones, like obviously we look at the average rating our app now gets on the App Store and compare that to what it previously was, and we hope that it's better. We might also be interested in the volume of ratings. It might actually, one of the objectives might be to get more ratings, because more high quality ratings is better than less high quality ratings. And thirdly, we might want to look at conversion, so in your app. So from people that from the users that you identified to ask for a rating, how many of those actually result in a rating on the App Store? So how do we get this right? My sort of approach to that is start very simple. So like I talk about a user model, but or what a happy user looks like, but it doesn't have to be like a complex model at all. It can be a few parameters that determine that. And I'll show a few case studies in a second that sort of give you examples of that. I would also start quite conservatively, and what I mean with that is start out by putting the bar quite high for what a happy user is. So require that they've had a lot of positive experiences in your app. So that sort of ensures that when you start experimenting with your setup, you don't really run the risk of getting negative reviews, but only get positives. And then sort of iterates towards the sweet spot. And the sweet spot, so basically by lowering kind of the requirements for a happy user, for a user that fits the profile to be prompted, you sort of hope to increase the number of ratings without lowering the quality of the ratings. So you want to get more ratings, but you still want them to be 5 stars. And if your setup allows for it, I would recommend sort of doing this iteration either in short bursts of time, like run a test for a day, run another test for a day, and if you can, like run it in single countries if you got a big user base. Then once you're happy, enable it globally, and you also have the choice then to reset your ratings in the App Store, which is something that, I don't know, came about in the past year or so that you could do that. So with every update of your app, you can reset your rating. So particularly if you have quite a substantial amount of average ratings, like 2 stars or 2.5 stars, 3 stars, and you now have tuned your system pretty well, you may want to get rid of those old ratings so you don't have to compensate for them. So to make this all a bit more concrete, I've got a couple of case studies. The first one is an app called Tiny Planet Photos, which is one of my apps. It's a photo filter app. It basically makes stereographic projections of your photos. It's also called Tiny Planets, kind of see why. So it's a really simple app. It lets you sort of make them in one tap and then tweak them to your heart's content. So for this app, kind of the right time to prompt a user for a rating is either when a user has just created a tiny planet, so they've just had a nice experience of going, whoa, this is awesome. Or even better, when a user has shared a tiny planet, because now we not only know that they just created one, but they created one that they're actually really happy with. We kind of use both in this app because the volume of people that share versus the volume of people that don't share. We basically don't get enough volume of shares to get enough ratings, or as many as we'd like. So we use them both. In terms of the model for what the right user needs to fit, we're quite aggressive in this app. And that's because of the nature of the app. It's kind of gimmicky app. It's not super sticky. Most people download it, use it for a few days, go like, whoa, this is really awesome, and then sort of like, leave it on their phone. But it's not like a frequently used app for a long time. So that's why we've configured it pretty aggressively. So the user only needs to have it installed for a day or more than a day. Only needs to have a minimum of 2 sessions with the app. But needs to have shared at least 2 images or videos. It makes videos as well. And then the user shouldn't have had bad experiences, so no crash for 5 days. And we do use the triage step in this app at the moment. So if a user has gone through that triage step and said, well, I actually don't like the app at the moment, we kind of give ourselves like 100 days to change this user's mind and ask them again.
How many crashes do you get?
Sorry?
How many crashes do you get?
In the app?
Yeah, because that's a part of your metric. Do you have?
No, it's a very stable app, but we do have the occasional crash, and then we don't ask for 5 days. So this is kind of the before snapshot of this app. So not 3.7 star average, not crazy bad, not amazing, and only like a rating every 3 days or so. And after implementing this review prompting feature, we got to 4.8 star rating and over 2 stars, over 2 ratings a day. So both the volume and the quality of the ratings was a lot higher.
How many users would you typically have a day?
Sorry?
How many active users would you typically have per day?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's around 1,000 or something. So, sorry?
20% of users would view your app.
No, I don't think so. I don't think those math are right. Sounds a bit high. So in summary, we got from 3.6 to 4.7 star average, an increase of 550% in the number of ratings. And that's sort of as a side note, it has very little impact on written reviews. So people can leave a star rating, but they can also write a review. This feature didn't have any real impact on these written reviews, which kind of makes sense because the friction for that is a lot higher. You actually do need to go out of the App Store, and obviously you also need to write something. So, a rating only takes 1 tap. So, on to case study 2, which is iflix, where I implemented a similar feature about a year ago. For people not aware what iflix is a streaming video on-demand service. specifically focused on like Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. We sort of suffered from pretty average reviews there. And as developers, we were pretty sad about that. So I suggested to implement a feature like this, and because I basically said the app is not as bad as the ratings are, so let's do something about it. And this app is very different from Tiny Planet Photos. Of course, like it's got a massively bigger user base. It's got a very different user base. It's a much more sticky app. People, sign up and keep using the app for a long time. So yeah, I thought it was interesting to show that as a sort of a counterexample. In this app, the right time was identified as when a user exits the player after the video player, after completely watching an asset, so a movie or an episode from a TV series. The idea being that when you exit the player, you're sort of in between things, and if you watch something all the way to the end, you must have liked it, otherwise you would have stopped and exited earlier. Because the app is so different and the app is much stickier, we were a lot more conservative in terms of the parameters for a happy user. So a minimum of like a month after sign up of the user, so the user needed to have been with the service for at least a month and have watched or partially watched at least 50 assets, so 50 episodes or 50 movies. Setting the bar quite high, but we had quite a big pool of users, so that's okay. And at least a week without a crash. And again, we used triage there as well. So if a user indicated not enjoying the app, we gave ourselves 3 months to sort of turn that around. With Tiny Planet Photos, I sort of ran experiments sort of globally for everyone because I don't have massive infrastructure to target different countries, which at iflix we did. So we actually ran our first experiment in one country for 24 hours. And the result was this. This is an app bot graph for 5 months of average rating for the app in that country. So it starts out at, I'm not sure it's really legible, but it starts out at about 2.7 star average, sort of creeps up to 2.8, and then all the way at the end, it jumps to 3.2 overnight. Which was pretty exciting when I came into work and saw this graph. It's like, whoa, cool.
Sorry, Adriaan.
Yep.
When you say you tested it in one market,
Yep.
did you have, was that decided, do you have like a server side?
Yeah, we have feature toggles at iflix that also you can choose to turn features on per region, per country. Yeah.
Is that with a rating reset expired?
No, that was without a reset. So it was 0.4 more overnight without resetting the ratings. Yes, I'll show you what it could have been right here. This was the ratings breakdown for that 24-hour period in that one country. So we got over 200 ratings at a 4.8 star average. Got everybody pretty excited. We did a sort of conversion analysis there as well. So there's sort of, with this triage, there's sort of 2 steps. We presented, or 3 steps, we present the triage, and then about 80% of the people that we showed that actually said, yes, I enjoy the app. So our user model for what a happy user looked like was pretty good. And then from those people that we then showed the rating, UI 37.6% actually gave us a rating in the App Store, which sort of gave us an overall conversion of 30%, which we were pretty happy with. So happy that we didn't really iterate on our model afterwards, and we were like, let's just roll this out globally. And in this case, we did reset the ratings because we were at that 2.8 average kind of globally, and it doesn't make sense to get all these 5-star reviews to sort of balance out those 2.7 star average. So we went from 2.7 stars to 4.7 stars globally pretty much overnight. And had like a 12 times increase in the rating volume as well. So it was a massive success, and I was really excited. But again, like written reviews, no, not really. So sort of in rounding out, why would you implement review prompting for your apps? Well, clearly because your App Store rating goes up, and your App Store rating being higher should lead to more downloads, and more downloads should lead to more profit. So that's kind of the business case. It's a bit hard to quantify because there's way too many variables to actually relate your App Store rating to profit. But there should be some kind of relationship. Another one that was really interesting, definitely I noticed that iflix was sort of developer satisfaction and morale. Like it makes a huge difference for a developer to show up to work every day when you know you're working on a 4.7 star app versus a 2.7 star app, even if the apps are exactly the same. Like, we didn't change the app itself, but it just makes you feel better. Apart from that, it's also a very little development effort. At iflix, I implemented this feature by myself, kind of in between my other work. No one else needed to be involved, not even really a designer, because all the UI was like just standard Apple UI. So it was just one developer doing it in between things and having an impact. That's it. Questions?
With the UI thing. Question on the UI.
Yep.
You talked about, I guess, using alerts.
Yep.
Did you experiment with like built-in UI? So the thing with alerts is quite often people get the wrong time, and I get annoyed, and I might be more inclined to say yes, I like it, and then give a bad review. I'm a bad user, but.
Sure.
Have you experimented with having the review triage thing built into other things? So, for example, if you've got a scrolling list, as you scroll past, instead of an advert that you might see on a freemium app, you might see, are you enjoying this? Do you want to review it?
Right. No, we haven't. There were suggestions to do that. Would have loved to experiment with that, but I was kind of lucky enough or pushed hard enough to get this done, and people were then so excited with the results that they were like, oh yeah, we're done. Let's move on and do all the other things we need to do. So yeah, that's definitely scope for more experiments.
Did the triage step come as a result of a failed experiment, or have you ever run one of these without using the triage step?
I don't think in the end we did run it without triage ever. No, it's
are you sure before you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean,
I
guess it was kind of, I sort of suggested doing it at iflix because people were a bit like not sure about this whole thing. So it's like if we put another fail-safe in, then plus, I do think like helping unhappy users is a good thing as well. So it kind of allows you to do that as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you can only prompt the user 3 times in 365 days.
Yep.
Does that reset when you update the app?
No. No, the idea, Apple's idea behind it is to not have app developers pester users all the time. So if all it took was like for you to submit another build to Apple and update your app to get 3 more bytes at it, that would kind of defeat the purpose, I guess. So it's really per calendar year, not per 365-day period. Yeah.
Were you tracking analytics on the people that actually said not favourable?
Sorry?
Were you tracking any analytics on the people that went down the non-favourable path? And were you getting much helpful feedback from that?
No, yeah, no. I mean, well, here we obviously we do now 20% of the people here we actually send to our customer service feedback form in the app. But I did check up with customer support, and they actually didn't notice a bump in their customer support requests. So we didn't dig further into that, but I assume that most people that got presented the customer support thing just clicked it away again. So there may have been some people that we helped, but
how do you measure the number of days since the last crash? Do you use a third-party SDK that gives you this info, or?
Sorry, how do you?
How do you measure the number of days since the last crash?
We've got in both Tiny Planet Photos and iflix, we use Crashlytics, and Crashlytics has a delegate protocol that you can get callbacks on the next launch of your app after a crash and tells you that your app crashed. So we use that date and log that.
Have you done any experimenting with other methods of increasing reviews? For example, we make app previews for clients, and a lot of the App Store listing components could set people's expectations before they even download the app so that they know what they're getting, and that's something we see that the videos benefit. Have you done anything looking at those kind of aspects that could improve the overall ratings before somebody even downloads it, so people who don't need the app never even install it?
Right. In short, no. I guess App Store optimization is, to me, still a bit of a dark art. Or at least it's hard for me. I tried doing it, but it's hard for me to sort of measure results and things like that. And then your idea of like sort of setting the expectations of the user in that as well to sort of prevent negative ratings, yeah, that's even a step further than I've ever thought. So, yeah.
We've had clients with that idea, so just...
Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how you can effectively measure that. So.
It might be kind of a naive question, but have you been able to track the work back from this to improve downloads based on the increased rating to kind of close the loop?
Yeah, as I said, it's really hard to do. Maybe unless all you change in your app is this feature, but both at iflix, especially at iflix, there's always lots of new features going in and lots of marketing campaigns going on at the same time, so it's really hard to isolate that. For Tiny Planet Photos, it might, in principle, be easier, but I don't know, there's so many variables that I haven't been able to.
Sorry, this is my first time. I don't know if this is done. Does anyone know about like any kind of evidence-based rating equals increased downloads data anywhere? I'd just be curious. Like, it seems pretty obvious that like higher rating is better, but
I can say that I have seen it, but I don't remember where. So you can probably find people have done studies on that. So.
Any other questions?
Adriaan, the outcomes that you experienced is exactly what I've experienced in a recent app implementation.
Yep.
We implemented a similar kind of, metric gating of before you ask the user, and then we reset the rating on release of that version, and it went exactly from like a 2.5 something to a 4.5 something, and it was.
Yeah, maybe it doesn't matter what you do.
If you
always 4 point something.
You didn't reference the Apple documentation in your presentation, but the Apple documentation on this is really, really good. If you read that and implement basically what it says, it's pretty common sense. They've even got some demo code. You too can get 4.5-star rating for your
Apple's, I was just looking through Apple's documentation the other day in preparation for this talk, and I hadn't seen it before, and I was like, that's very close to what I'm doing.
It's pretty good.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I just love it so Apple that their SDK's got one API method, and you call it, and that's it. It shows or doesn't. You go to all this effort, Apple's like, we're the boss. We're the boss. That's it, yeah. Yeah, thank you, Adriaan.
Thanks.